Carlos Fenmann, the Bitcoin coach. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Will.
I really appreciate you being willing to do this because I knew going into the podcast with LaserHodl, we'd probably go deep into the why of Bitcoin and assume an experienced or knowledgeable audience as much as possible. And so, I had the thought like, well, what if people don't know much about the mechanics of it, the what of it? And so I immediately thought of you and wanted to have a conversation with you where maybe we get the chance to answer some questions that LaserHodl's podcast raise and go over some of the basics and some of the more important questions related to Bitcoin. So I really appreciate you being willing to do this.
Perfect. And I think it's a good idea because I love the podcast with LaserHodl and how you went really deep into the whys, right? But a lot of people, I think, don't realize like what makes Bitcoin different and what makes it tick. So they're kind of taking our word for it. And I think that Bitcoin is a proof of work thing, not just in the way the mining works, but also like in order for you to really trust Bitcoin, you need to put in the work of understanding what you're getting into.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And then that term proof of work is so important. And just a quick note to the people that are listening on the podcast, just another reminder that we're going to be going through some slides. And so you may want to pop over to YouTube at some point and listen as we work through the slides related to Carlos's teaching program, where he gets the chance to actually coach people. This is why he's the Bitcoin coach, to coach people through the process, of ramping up on Bitcoin to the point where they understand what it's about. And that's actually what you and I did, Carlos, like back in, I think it was summer 2020, when I decided, like, let's check out this Bitcoin thing I've been hearing about. What did it take? It took like two conversations for me to be like, yep, I'm in. I get it.
Yeah, and when I first got into Bitcoin, I enthusiastically tried to orange pill my friends and oh, you should buy Bitcoin, it's awesome, blah 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 blah, and a few did, and then of course the big crash of 2018 came, and so some panicked and sold and lost money, and the ones who didn't, it turned out that they had bought so little that they really didn't care. Mm-hmm. So, that realization led me to understand that we have to do a better job of helping people on board onto Bitcoin. Mm. And when I started, I would ask people, all right, so what are your questions? And I realized that most people just don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. Right? It's so, like, Bitcoin is pretty wide in the term of in the ways of the different approaches you could take to understanding it. So what I've tried to do is to create this basic knowledge base, right? That people can absorb, and then, all right, like, now I understand sort of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and where it's going. And so from there, you need to keep doing your own study, but at least you have like a solid grounding, because at the beginning it can be intimidating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're actually having this conversation. So when LaserHodl and I talked, it was last Thursday. Then there was this big dip that happened over the weekend, which we're now sitting on the other side of. So hopefully, which is fine. Like that's kind of part of it. Like once you understand how Bitcoin, in my experience anyway, once you understand how it works, what it does, what it's for, the nature of the environment that it exists in, and what it essentially has to say about that environment, big dips are to be expected and are opportunities. It's not like a stock where a stock price crash signals some instability within the corporation because the CEO, had some sort of scandal, right, or, some sort of new technology didn't work out or whatever. It doesn't really work like that. It's subject to very different forces, but people don't really understand how, well, A, they don't understand how to think about money to begin with, and B, they don't know how to think about the value of money that oscillates in the way that Bitcoin does. And once you learn to see that, then it's like, oh, okay, Bitcoin's on sale. Like, hold on while I just get some more.
Exactly. And, none of us have ever lived through a technology becoming money, right? This is a new
Yes.
phenomenon.
That's a great point.
And and it's, the market will try to shake you off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like one of the things that I like about the work I do and the way I do it is like with this dip, I didn't get a single message from any of my clients being concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Like the few that I got was things like I just up 40%, my allocation to Bitcoin by 40%, or
Wow.
I'm buying the dip. They were happy with it because they understand it's a long-term proposition. They're not look. There's people that are traders and they're good at speculating with it. That's not me. Like I'm not a buy low, sell high type of. That's not my skill. That's not my mentality. For me, it's more, what makes sense to buy and hold for the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we like LaserHodl talked about how he had gone from, 0 to 99% and how difficult it was to go from 99 to 100%. And, not everyone has to or is going to get
Right.
there, right? And you don't need to do it right away. I think people in many different ways are really used to this, all or nothing kind of thinking like, oh, if I have any cash in my wallet or any cash in my checking account, I need to switch all over to Bitcoin, or they look at it as some sort of casino kind of property, as a get rich quick, or because that's so much of crypto. It's like, no, you have to
Right.
relearn how to think about technology and how to think about money for the long-term separation from the fiat everything system. And that's what I loved. Another thing I loved about, listening to LaserHodl and other podcasts, and on this one, it's like fiat money, fiat food, fiat science. It's like, wow, it just summoned out of thin air. And if you want an exit from that, you go to Bitcoin, which is not about fiat. It's about actual proof of work, the creation, the genuine creation of something, as opposed to just some sort of money magic out of which, nothing is woven out of something is woven out of nothing, I suppose.
And it's astonishing how pervasive this becomes. I mean, the extent to which fake money permeates the rest of culture is something that I think for most of us is unexpected until you start seeing it. It's very invisible, and there's just this feeling of dislocation and this feeling of things that don't make sense, blah blah. And then once you sort of understand that, oh, it's the money's rotten,
Mm-hmm.
and how that really impacts everything else. It's quite amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just if you build a civilization, you build a society on top of money, and the money is rotten, you know, if you plant something in polluted soil, what are you going to get? You're going to get polluted fruit.
Right. Yeah.
Right, and so that's the nature of our money that people just don't understand, and it's such an incrimination of everything, our educational system, first of all, that people don't actually understand that that money is summoned out of nothing. It's summoned out of debt, and it's created by a group of private banks that loan it to the United States and others at interest. Like, it's people don't understand that. They hear the term Federal Reserve, that word is probably like the best branding ever. Like, they should study that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And when you read, you watch a series like Bill Still's The Money Masters on YouTube, and I haven't read
Right.
The Creature from Jekyll Island, but certainly I know how strongly
Oh,
recommended it
it's
is.
a good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, exactly. I've got it in my Amazon cart. I should just order the thing. But it's like, why don't people know this? Well, obviously there's reasons why people don't know this, but it's such an incrimination of our entire system that what it's all built on, that's dollar that I'm sure I've got a dollar sitting right over there, is it's that's worth nothing. It's worth nothing just because we just agree that it's worth something because we just agree that it is. And that's the whole thing.
I think I think one of your presidents said something like, "If people understood how money works, there'd be a revolution, by the next morning."
Mm-hmm,
Right. So
mm-hmm.
there's a reason why we're not taught these things.
Yes. And so for those listening, Carlos does not live in the United States. He is a
Right.
he's a foreigner, but we like him anyway a lot.
And on that note, I like to tell my clients that money is kind of like electricity, right? We use it every day, but most of us don't really understand what's going on, what it
Yeah.
takes for us to be able to use it in that sort of brainless manner. And once you start looking at how the sausages are made, it's like, holy crap,
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I think, and we'll get to the slideshow just in a minute here, but I think that's the thing that 2020 and beyond. I mean, it's probably going to be 2020 forever. Let's like ostensibly the calendar says like 2022, but we're still in 2020 as far as I'm
Right.
concerned.
It's a
So that
psyop.
it's completely is time is a psyop. Oh, don't get started on that. But I think people realize that all these things that were effortless and frictionless and just kind of like conveniently worked or whatever, or we just took for granted, suddenly have become so much more difficult. And the need, and it's not just it's a need to question everything that grew out of essentially nowhere. Like, wait a minute, everything is a lie. I picked this up: the food, water, electromagnetic frequencies, etc. And this paper, like, suddenly it's very much like waking up in the Matrix, and everything that I believe is a lie. Well, yeah, kind of, for some people. For some people. And so that's the exciting thing about this moment. And this is why I was excited about the conversation with LaserHodl, because he laid it out so clearly that
Yeah.
there is a component of like, well, okay, so I'm going to get under the barbell. I'm going to start eating steak. I'm going to start getting in the sun. I'm going to start reading my
Yep.
Bible and all these things. And yet, there's still something else we got to do. And that something else we got to do is figure out what to do about money to separate from the system. And the answer to that is Bitcoin. And it was profoundly empowering to hear him lay out that conversation.
Right. Which is one of the things that people need to understand. This is not just about, bro, put your money in Bitcoin and you're going to double it, or you're going to make 10x. No,
Yeah.
no, no, no. I mean, yes, we hope that happens and that'll be nice. But it's also one of the most powerful things you can do to protest against the current state of things is to deprive the machine of its fuel. So
Mm-hmm.
when you opt to this alternative money system, you're starving that machine of fuel, because most of most of the apparatus that is oppressive is basically able to run because they control the money.
Mm-hmm.
That's what fuels their machinery.
Yes.
So there's a lot more than just making some nice profits.
Oh yeah, and even that LaserHodl tied it to the vaccine imperialist agenda, that countries' access to credit creation
Absolutely.
is tied to that. It's like, oh, that explains it. That it's not just tied to money. And this is the really important distinction, the really important nuance, is that it's not like pallets of cash are being delivered like we gave to Iran. It's credit creation. It's the ability to
Yeah.
spend money recklessly that it's tied to, which is in some sense the same as the creation of money, but in another sense is actually far more pernicious, because it can just happen with a snap of a finger. Like, congratulations, there are now additional zeros in your bank account. Enjoy. And it makes it so much so much easier. And that's, that there's so much less friction, makes
Yeah.
this imperialist agenda flow much more smoothly than if pallets of cash or bars of gold needed to be moved around the world.
Right. The idea, I mean, the common meme of, money printer goes burr. It's
Yeah.
funny, right?
Yeah.
And I've lived in countries where that's happened, right? Where like they've actually printed money and devalued the currency. These days, it's a lot more subtle
Mm-hmm.
and a lot more pernicious for that subtleness, right? Just click
Mm.
of a button, and when you remember that the government has no money, right? That
Right.
it's your money and that
Mm-hmm.
they're borrowing from the future to
Mm.
to create this credit. Those are the sorts of things that we need to start working on understanding, so that we can appreciate sort of the magnitude both of what's happening now and how Bitcoin is an important part of preventing uh, a lot of different bad things happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, and let's jump in right now. And I just want to say that if you look at the proportion of government spending that is driven by taxes versus driven by debt, that answers the
Yeah.
question, right? All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna jump to your presentation and just we'll rip through it, and you and I'll just have a dialogue as you go through the slides and cover the topics that are related to some of the things that LaserHodl said. I have some questions, and then there's your standard kind of approach to ramping people up on Bitcoin who are at zero, because the goal is to get them off of that zero and onto another zero.
Right, get off of zero. And yeah, so what we're about to go through one of my uh, standard conversations. It's usually the second or third conversation I have with people, and it's called "How Does Bitcoin Work?" And there are bits that get a little into the weeds technically because we have to, right?
Hmm.
But hopefully, we'll be able to use that to highlight also some of the differences between Bitcoin and other crypto. And for those who don't realize this yet, Bitcoin and crypto are not the same.
Hmm.
Bitcoin is the real deal, and crypto is chips in the casino,
Hmm.
right? And you can gamble at the casino, and if you're having fun, that's fine. Just don't think that you're buying gold when you're buying casino chips.
I remember the first time you told me the term shit coins, and that's still my favorite term.
Yeah, for months you giggled. That was
I
funny.
still do. It's just excellent anti-branding. Okay, I'll let you jump into it. Like go forward, because I'll just giggle about shitcoin quietly in
So
the background.
so speaking of crypto, right? One of the interesting things about Bitcoin is that it's actually not encrypted. Right. One way to think about Bitcoin and its transactions is to think of emails, right? We're sending text messages amongst each other. And the crypto part of things comes from cryptographic tools like keys and signatures and hashes, some of which we'll discuss today. But the actual information that's running or coursing through the blockchain itself is transparent, it's human readable, right? And it looks like something like we have on the screen. This may not be obvious to you what the hell this means, but point being is text that anybody can read. It's not encrypted per se.
Hmm.
And uh, it is, in fact, so transparent that people come up with dashboards which display that information and interpret it. So at any given point in time, you can see how many Bitcoin have been issued, how many transactions are working their way through the system, how much value was processed yesterday, etc. And if you run your own node, you can look up this information by yourself, right? I remember in one of my conversations, I was making the point that we don't really know how much gold there is in Fort Knox,
Hmm.
right? And my boomer client was like, no, we do know because there was a report and this guy said on TV. I'm like, bro,
Bro.
you know what that guy told you,
Yeah.
but you don't have a clue as
Yeah.
to what the hell is inside Fort Knox or not. With Bitcoin, you actually can go and query the system yourself on your computer, running your software, and you can see what the situation is.
Hmm. And that's really important. That's transformative. This idea that and we can get into the privacy question later about this, but that it is open and there's nothing hidden. There's, like you said,
Transparent.
it's very, very transparent, and there's a lot of positives that come with that as well.
Right. And you mentioned privacy, which we'll discuss in a bit, but indeed, one of the challenges is being able to keep the system permissionless and transparent and making it private, right? That's not
Hmm.
an easy thing to do. What some people seem to think like, oh, there's this privacy switch they could just flip on, and why don't they? Well, no. If you want to keep these other attributes, like some of the privacy coins, for example, yeah, they're private, but they're so private that you can't know how many coins exist.
Hmm.
So you have to
Mm.
trust them that they're emitting the number of coins they say they are.
That's very
So
okay.
it's a tricky balance.
That's very interesting. Like, yeah, because what would you make private? If you pseudonymize, you can still track the amounts that are going from place to place. So we would want to obscure the amounts. But when you obscure the amounts, who has access to find out how many coins are actually in the system? And then you create a hierarchy instead of being open and transparent. It's very interesting.
So when we talk about a blockchain, what does that mean? Well, yeah, it's a chain of blocks, right? So what's a block? A block is basically a group of transactions, and Bitcoin tries to produce a new block every 10 minutes on average. Each block has a 4 megabyte size limit in Bitcoin. Most blocks are about 2 or 3 megabytes and hold between 2,500 to 3,000 transactions. So that is a well-known constraint, right? If you want to have a system with 10,000 transactions, yeah, well, that's not Bitcoin for the moment, right?
Right.
Now, systems in real life have constraints, right? That's just the reality of things. And what Bitcoin has tried to do is to optimize for those constraints, and the constraints were designed very specifically to achieve certain things, and we'll get into that as we go into the presentation.
Okay.
So the seed of each new block chains it to the previous one, right? So one of the reasons we call it a blockchain is because each block contains the seed that will help create the next block. And they're sort of, you can't break that history without if your block is to be valid, it needs to be linked to the previous one, and so on and so forth. So that's why we call it a blockchain. Now, the word Bitcoin refers to many things: a software, a technology, the cryptocurrency. It also refers to a network, right? And this is a picture of the Bitcoin network. There are over 14,000 nodes presently known, and they're spread, pretty much all over. And as you have experienced, it's fairly easy to run a node. It's an inexpensive device, and once you get it up and going, it's fairly maintenance free. So what exactly is a node? It's just a computer running Bitcoin software, right? And it should be frequently connected to the internet, because Bitcoin software is very connected, right? It's all about connecting with other peers. And before, when you start running a node, it's like a Telegram chat, right? When you go into the chat and you have like 2,000 messages that you're behind on, except in the blockchain, you can't write anything new until you catch up with all of the chat, right? So when you start syncing your node, what it does is it starts downloading every single transaction from the very first block, and not just downloading it, but verifying it, right? The Bitcoin software has the rules of what a good transaction is, and it verifies that each transaction is compliant with the rules. So this takes a while. It's called the initial sync, and this process takes a little while.
Yeah, I think it took me about maybe 48 hours or something like that once I plugged the node in and got it running.
Right. Now, yours was mostly synced already. But if you get it from scratch, it could take you a week, depending on your internet connection, right?
Got it. Oh, okay. That explains a lot, because I talked to my buddy Sean, and he's like, "Oh, mine's still syncing." I was like, "Mine went really fast. What's the difference?" That explains it.
Right. You were only like a couple of weeks behind.
Got it.
Right. And this is crucially important. You don't need permission to run a node. You just buy off-the-shelf hardware and download the software and start running it. And you don't need to tell anyone, and you don't need any sort of license or any special anything, right? This is very, very important. So there are different types of computer networks, right? The typical network that we're used to is a centralized network, like the bank, right? Where there's a server, and so the lady at the window, if you're trying to do some transaction and the server is down, it's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, our system is down. Thank you." That's because it's a very centralized system. Now, centralized systems have their strengths. They're very fast, they're very efficient, and you have a single source of truth for everything. But that also makes them vulnerable, because if the server's down, you're kind of screwed. And this is not just a theoretical concern. This is how the Fedwire system operates. The Fedwire is responsible for all transactions between banks and all U.S. international transactions. And in February of last year, I think, the server crashed and it was down for a couple of hours. So imagine all interbank and all US international money transactions frozen, and you're watching this on Twitter, and they're like, well, we're restarting the server. And it took them hours to get this back up. A total clown show, right? Mm-hmm. So centralized systems have their risks. In a decentralized system, there's no master server, right? So there's no single point of failure. They're a lot more resistant against network failures, because if one machine goes down, the other ones just take up the slack, and it doesn't really matter. But it also makes them a lot slower and a lot less efficient, right? Mm-hmm. And it also begs the question, if there's not like the master server, then who makes the rules and who enforces them, right? And so the way Bitcoin works is there are consensus rules in which there is no higher authority. We say rules, not rulers, right? Mm-hmm. When you raise your hand and you say, I want to play here, and you run up your node, then you're saying that you're abiding by those rules. And if you reprogram your node to run by a different rule set, you'll sort of automatically get kicked out of the network. So you'll be free to play with other people who want to run the same rules as you, but that will no longer be Bitcoin, mm-hmm. right? And so a lot of the early shitcoins were kind of like this. They just took the code of Bitcoin. So for example, Litecoin, right? They said, all right, we're going to grab Bitcoin, but instead of 21 million, we'll do, I don't remember what the number is, but I'll make it up, 480 million. And mm-hmm. instead of one block every 10 minutes, we'll do a block every 2 minutes, but it's basically, the rest of it is almost identical to Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody wants to play the Litecoin game, they can run the Litecoin node, blah, blah. But it's not Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. Now, most other blockchains are distributed. What does that mean? Because they claim they're decentralized as well. The reality is not so much. It means, yes, there's computers in different places of the world that are running their software, but it's hard, like their nodes are difficult to run. Mm-hmm. They require powerful machines, very high speed connections, a lot of know-how. There's a guy, James Unlop, which every year runs a test in which he tries to run nodes from different cryptos. And it's very enlightening. And now, like, he's got a machine that was really powerful in 2018. And now he can't run most of the nodes because he runs out of memory. He's got, I think, a 32 gigabyte RAM or something and a terabyte drive, but that's not enough to run most of these things now.
Oh my gosh.
So one of the problem with most cryptos is, and you can ask, like, whenever somebody tells you, oh, Ethereum is decentralized and decentralization is a spectrum. Yeah. The actually guy,
Yeah,
actually, like Ethereum is Ethereum is more decentralized than Facebook for sure. But ask the guy if he runs an Ethereum node, right? And most likely the answer will be no, because it's a pain in the ass. So they wind up trusting those nodes, and that's a problem. Mm-hmm. So, all right, you've spun up your node. So that node, the first thing it does is it connects to the internet. It looks for some friends. It looks for some peers, and it connects with 8 or so nodes. And it starts. They start gossiping about transactions. What's new? Does anybody have any new transactions? All right, here we go. And they start chatting between each other, right? And if a node drops, let's say light goes off at your house and your node drops. It doesn't matter. Anybody you were connected with will just pick a different node and take it from there, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't really affect anything.
And the nodes are chosen by geographic location or
kind of like
random signal.
Good question. I don't know the exact answer. I believe it's kind of random. Okay. So one of your nodes could be, down the street, and the other could be across the world, right? And whenever, let's say, if you are sending me some sats in your wallet, right? Whenever you push send, What actually happens is your wallet sends that transaction to a node.
Mm-hmm.
If you're like a full citizen Bitcoiner, then of course it's your own node, right, that processes that transaction. But for most people, it's somebody else's node. So that
Mm-hmm.
node will take your transaction and verify it. Say, well, Will says he wants to send some sats to this guy. Does he have enough? Is the signature correct? Is the address right? Blah, 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 blah. Verifies everything. And if everything checks out, then it transmits that transaction to its peer nodes and says,
Okay.
hey, here's a new transaction. Now, those peer nodes, they don't take your node's word for it. They also take the transaction and verify everything about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They go through the exact same process that your node did. And if it's fine, then they pass it on. But if something about your transaction is fishy or wrong, then it dies inside that little box, right? It doesn't get out into the wider network.
Mm-hmm.
Which is one of the reasons it's hard to cheat with Bitcoin, because transactions need to work in order to spread. It's very hard for an invalid transaction to spread. All right. So it's run on validation.
Got it. And so, okay, here we go. Yeah, boarding gate to the blockchain. So what sort of things, sorry, what sort of things mean a transaction might be invalid? Just an improper signature? Like just an example of what a peer node network might flag.
Right. An improper signature, or you, let's say that for whatever reason, a miner tries to pay himself more than what he should, right? An incorrect address that doesn't exist. So it could be a number of things. They're fairly rare,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I haven't had the experience of running across a weird transaction, which it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's just
Yeah, just
it's
rare.
not frequent. Yeah. So the nodes that you're connected to, your peer nodes, they're connected to other peer nodes as well, right? So when a transaction is in transit, right, it hasn't really been added to the blockchain yet. So it's in this sort of limbo state, right, which is called the mempool. The mempool, each node has a little memory set aside for the mempool, and it puts already verified transactions there that are not yet in the blockchain, right? And I say it's like a boarding gate, because it's like, if you buy a ticket to a plane, you're at the airport, you're at the boarding gate, you're not on the plane yet. You haven't, but you have your ticket. And that's kind of where a transaction is. Now, each node has a slightly different version of the mempool, because, like you were asking, maybe one of your nodes is in China, but one of my connected peers is in Italy, and so the transactions arrive at different times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So each one has its own little view of the mempool, so to speak.
Got it.
And this is what, like, the mempool, sometimes it's very busy, sometimes it's empty. Like if a lot of people want to push their transactions through, then the mempool gets filled up. Transactions become more expensive, fees become more expensive, because there's a limited space, So if all the blocks are full, it's like if a plane is very full and you want to buy a ticket, it's going to be more expensive than if the plane were empty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing happens with transactions. Sometimes, if you want to send a transaction and the mempool is full, what you do is you wait for the weekend, and usually things get quieter on the weekend, and then you can get your transaction through cheaper. But if you're in a rush, maybe you have to pay a premium price.
Got it.
Right? And that's a market. So now we move on to the miners. Miners are the ones who take those transactions from the mempool, put them into blocks, and then start competing to try to add the next block to the blockchain, right? And they compete using something called proof of work mining, which requires them to spend energy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they're trying to find a new block, add it to the blockchain, and they're burning electricity to do that, right? Now, and we'll get into that process in more detail in a bit. But the thing to understand is, once a miner finds a block, it's not immediately, magically, and irreversibly added to the blockchain. They broadcast it to the network just like their transactions. And the network of nodes like yours and mine, those little machines, verify that the block is also good and valid, right? If a miner tries to get away with any sort of shenanigan on his block, like paying himself more or whatever, our nodes will reject that block and the miner won't get paid. So nodes like the ones that we run at home keep the network and the miners honest, right? So the real power doesn't reside with the miners, it resides with the full nodes because they only get paid if they produce valid blocks. Now,
So sorry,
yeah.
real quick question. So you have the peer groups from the nodes that are processing various transactions, trying to get the transactions into the mempool. So you have, say you have a peer node group that's located, over in Italy, and then there's another one on the other side of the world here in America, and they have two slightly or perhaps even massively different sets of transactions that are trying to make their way, into a block.
Yeah.
If let's say so, to make sure that I understand, let's say a block is mined over closer to the Italian peer group, and so those transactions get placed into the block, and then the ones over here in America would make their way into a block later, or how do you, at what stage would the American block get pushed in? At some point, for sure, right?
Excellent question, and I think it's like the next slide. So bear
perfect.
with me, and we'll get to it. So, yeah,
perfect.
But it's a very pertinent question. So the sum of all of this, right? The mining and the verification, the proof of work, blah blah, is called Nakamoto consensus. That's like that's what the whole mechanism is called, right? The rules plus the proof of work. So when and I was wrong, it's the slide after this one, I think, but we'll get to your question very soon. Sure. Once a miner finds a block, right, you can think of this as your transaction has now boarded the plane, right? You're now on the plane. And by the way, the miner can choose which transactions to process. Miners are kind of like the gate lady in the plane. If you paid first class, meaning if you paid a high fee for your transaction, you're getting on right away. If you paid for cheap seats, then you may or may not get on, depending on my mood, how full the plane is, et cetera, et cetera. You might have to wait till the next one.
Okay.
Right?
So if I'm in the question that I was asking, then if one set of transactions are on the other side of the country, say in America, if someone pays a high fee, will nodes broadcast that further throughout the network so that a larger degree of miners will get to it, or is it just in its relative area?
No, the broadcast process is the same, but it'll be more likely to be picked by miners to make it onto the next block.
Okay. But you can't actually guarantee that it'll push because you don't actually know if a miner is going to get the right answer, which we'll get to.
Right.
Yep. Okay.
Exactly. So, so let's say the miner says, all right, I found a new block, and it starts broadcasting that new block, right? And it's about to be added to the blockchain. And like we said, they have this fingerprint that we'll get into. But this is where your question comes in. What happens if, all right, I found this block and I'm broadcasting it, and all of a sudden some guy in Italy also found a block kind of at the same time with more or less the same transactions. And now, like, my node is confused because it got, the American block and it was good and it was valid. And then it got the Italian block and it was also good and it was also valid. It's like, well, which one do I pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that Satoshi Nakamoto decided to break this tie is wait till the next block comes through and see which one they pick, the Italian or the American.
Mm-hmm.
And so whichever one, whenever the next version of the chain comes through, whichever one they picked is the good one. That's the version of the blockchain that stays.
Mm-hmm.
It's the heaviest chain, or the chain with the most proof of work attached to it, is always taken as the good one.
Got it.
And so, and that if any transactions were kind of left hanging in the process, that's like when you board the plane and all of a sudden they tell you, you know what, too full, you'll have to exit the plane and get on the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So the transaction just gets back into the mempool and then takes its turn in the next block.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So maybe you'll have to wait a little longer, but the transaction isn't lost immediately or anything. It just gets pushed off to a future block.
But if you need, it sounds like if you absolutely need a Bitcoin transaction to go through, it's not like PayPal where you just like
No.
it just goes. Like there's really no way to fully guarantee that your Bitcoin transaction is going to go through in the next block being mined. Like it's impossible to guarantee that.
Exactly. But you can help your chances by adding a good fee.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Right.
That's like a nice tip for the miners. So wink, wink, and they'll take your hint.
Got it. But even then, you can't get, no miner can guarantee that they'll actually successfully mine the block. So there's some necessary ambiguity built into the system that you can't get exactly what you want exactly when you want it, because
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. And so, by the way, this is called a block collision or a reorg, and one block reorganizations in Bitcoin are fairly common. Like it happens a few times a year at least, right? Where, we had this block and we thought it was good, but guess what? It wasn't, and it was replaced by this other block. 2-block reorgs are unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I've ever seen a 3-block reorg. So the deeper your block goes, the less likely that is to happen. And at this point, I'd like to make a brief, sort of side note here of why a block every 10 minutes. Because when I first learned about this, I swear I got a tear in my eyes. I thought it was so beautiful. So Satoshi sort of measured the speed at which transactions would propagate through the network. As it turns out, it takes about 6 hops between nodes for a transaction to propagate across the whole network on average, which I thought was pretty remarkable. It seemed, I would have thought it was a lot more.
That's amazing.
But anyway, so given the speed at which that information can be transmitted in this gossip fashion, 10 minutes per block, given the size of the Earth, was calculated to make it so that these sorts of block collisions would only happen about 1% of the time. Right? Which I think is like when we say Bitcoin is the first money that's engineered, this is the type of thing we're talking about.
Yeah, the depth. I mean, this is the cool thing. This is what I love about talking to you. The depth of engineering in the solution continues to unfold and get deeper as my understanding of it grows. And you always bring up stuff like this, like, oh, okay, that's like he thought that through. And we'll get to who Satoshi Nakamoto is, but he thought that through. Like, okay, that block collisions would be a natural outgrowth of the nature of the network. What can I do to minimize them without affecting the overall flow of the network itself?
Right. So, for example, this is one of those things where if this was the reason why there's a block every 10 minutes, right? And then I tell you that Ethereum has a block every 4 seconds. It's not difficult to understand, well, shit, they must have a shit ton of collisions, which they do.
Yeah.
Right. And so they have this whole complicated uncle and blah, blah, blah system to try to deal with those collisions. And, but it's the engineering in Bitcoin, it's not perfect, but it is exquisite.
Amazing.
So, all right. So your transaction is now in a block, right? Once the next block is mined, this is like being on the plane and the plane has taken off, right? So yeah, the plane could turn around and land again, but it's less likely to happen, right? If you've taken off, there's a good chance that you're well on your way to your destination, because we say that each block sort of buries the previous blocks under its weight, where the
Mm-hmm.
weight is the proof of work that it took to find that block, right? So older transactions become sort of hardened, kind of like concrete. Uh, so if that's why they say, like, well, if you and I are making a transaction and it's for, like, say, $20, as soon as you see that it's coming, even if it doesn't have any confirmations in it, you're probably good. But if you're like buying a house, you know, maybe you wait an hour because it'll get 5 or 6 blocks on top of it, and that will give you a more greater finality, right? The likelihood of a transaction changing or being bumped or whatever once it's 6 block deep is basically zero, or fairly close to zero.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep. It's sort of baked in. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And here's why, right? Let's assume that if every miner in the world is working on the next block, which is block 91, right? And I want to change a transaction that's in block 74, then I need to not only redo block 74, I need to do blocks 74 through 90 before the rest of the world finds block 91, right? So the amount of computing power that entails is now at the point of being just ridiculous and completely infeasible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Because you have
so
to.
it's expensive. Yeah, so it's expensive to cheat in Bitcoin, and it's getting close to the point where it's not just expensive, but it's like almost impossible. Like the footprint you would leave on the supply chain to buy enough miners, blah, blah, would be visible. I mean, the amount of power you would need, like it's getting to the point where it's just like not going to happen, right?
Right. Yeah. No, you can't. You can't you don't have the computing power to rewrite that many blocks before the world finds that next block. You're working on 15 blocks in the same amount of time that other people are working on one. And the
Right.
longer that you take to do each of those, another block might get mined. So it gets away from you
For
really
sure.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. So getting a little into mining itself, right? Mining is a little like buying the lottery, right? The more tickets you buy, the better odds you have of winning. All right. Well, it's kind of the same. In Bitcoin, miners are looking for a winning number, right? And it's possible to hit the winning number on your very first try. It's just highly unlikely, right? And each attempt at finding a winning number is like buying a lottery ticket. It has a cost, right? So you'll often hear people say that miners need to solve complex math equations. That's often a sign that whoever's saying that doesn't have a clue of what they're talking about, or at least not of how proof of mining works. Proof of mining is basically guesswork, right? It's a brute force process, kind of like opening a padlock, right? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to open a padlock. You just need some time, and cycle through each combination. And if you're lucky, you'll get it quickly. If you're not lucky, you'll have to go all the way through and until you hit the actual combination, right? But it's also this is also a good analogy, because once I find the opening combination, it's very easy for me to tell you, well, the combination is 1, 2, 3, and you can verify that indeed 1, 2, 3 opens the lock. And you don't need to spend a lot of computing power to verify that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why our nodes, which are not powerful machines, can verify that blocks are valid without spending a ton of energy. What takes a lot of energy is guessing that number that will unlock the combination. All right. So there's an element of randomness in Bitcoin mining. Just like in certain games, you need to roll a certain combination of dice to win. Something like the process of mining is similar, right? There's a process called hashing, where each time you hash, it's like rolling a dice, and you're trying to find the winning number. And what hashing does is it's a mathematical function, well-known, like this is used to encrypt top secret documents, blah, blah. It's a very well-studied thing. And it takes an input and basically converts it into a string of gibberish, right? And you can see some examples on the screen. And for those of you that are not looking at the screen, you'll see that any change in the input will produce a completely different output. So you can't predict what's going to happen. Like if I just change this letter, if I just add a comma, you can't know what's going to come out the other end, right? Because the way this hash function garbles the input is unpredictable, which happens to be an important property, right? So they call it a one-way function, which is like, once you have confetti, it's really hard to try to redo, right, the original document. So it's like when you lose a password for a website, for example, right? And you click the I forgot my password button. They don't send you your password typically, right? They send you a link to make a new password, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Because they don't know your password. They only see the hash of your password, right? Mm-hmm. When you're typing something on the screen and you see those little dots, that means that what you're sending is the hash. They don't get the actual word that you use for your password. They just get the hash of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, so Bitcoin takes hashing. It's a crucial part of the process, and one of the ways you build a block is by using hashes of hashes, which means you take a transaction and you hash it. You take the second transaction and you hash that. And you take the combination of those two and you hash those, and so on and so forth, like a little tree, until you get to a single hash that represents every single transaction in your block. That not only makes it very compact, but also if you were to change anything about any transaction in your entire block, the hash would be different,
mm-hmm.
right? So this makes it very, very tamper-proof.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So once you've hashed all of your block, you're going to try. Miners produce something called a block header, which is kind of like the fingerprint of the block, right? It's got. We remember how we said they're linked together because each block has the seed of the next one. Well, that's the header, right? So the header of the previous block plus the hash of all of the transactions in your block plus a timestamp plus a random number. And that's going to be your entry to the lottery, right? That's what you're going to try to find the winning number with.
Got it.
And we'll talk about this random number because it happens to be important. The number is called a nonce, a number used only once, and its sole purpose is to change the hash of your header, mm-hmm. right? Because let's say you're mining a block, right, and you've got all your transactions, blah blah, and then you hash it and you don't find the winning number. Instead of redoing all of the block, you just change that one thing. You just change that nonce, and then mm-hmm. you hash again.
Yep.
And if you don't win, you change it and hash again, right?
Because if the nonce is 1, it'll hash one way, the whole totality of it. And if you just change that nonce to 2, it hashes in a completely different way.
Absolutely. And there's no way, you can try to be clever and say, oh, we'll start at 100, but there's no way you could have known whether maybe it was 7,
Right.
So you need to go through the process of every single number until you find it, right? So how hard is it to find a block? Well, it depends, right? I've been saying that miners are looking for a winning number. And what that basically means is that your number has to hit a certain difficulty target, which is measured by a certain number of zeros at the beginning of the number, right? Mm-hmm. So on the screen, at the bottom of the screen, there's 2 different numbers, and it's fairly plain to see that one has a lot more leading zeros than the other, right? And that's because those two numbers were actual block headers like 10 years apart. So as you might be able to tell, it took a lot more guesswork to find a number that started with 15 zeros than it did finding a number that started with 5 zeros, right?
Okay.
So it took a lot more work to actually, find that. At least statistically so.
Okay, got it. Because the answer has to start with a certain number of zeros, not the
Exactly.
nonce. Got it. Okay, so like, what are the odds you're going to find something with 15 statistically? What are the odds that you're going to find something that leads with 15 zeros to get to your hash? Like, that's a pretty narrow parameter to have.
Right.
Yep.
And this is also why two different people can find blocks that are both valid. Because if both of them hit the difficulty target, then they're both valid blocks.
Right.
Right. So now there could be a problem. Like, what happens as technology gets faster, or as more and more miners come online and are working on these problems? Well, the normal thing would be blocks are being found faster, right? Because we have more powerful processors, because more people are throwing computer power at it, right? So since Bitcoin wants to produce a block every 10 minutes, how do we deal with this sort of increase in computing power being dedicated to finding blocks? And the answer has been called the crown jewel of Bitcoin, which is the difficulty adjustment. And what happens is that every 2016 blocks, which is more or less 2 weeks, the system sort of looks back and at the timestamps and said, all right, how fast are these blocks coming? And if they're coming in at a faster rate, that once every 10 minutes, then it increases the difficulty of mining. And if for whatever reason, like let's say they shut off the miners in China, so the blocks are coming in too slow, they're coming in slower than every 10 minutes, once every 10 minutes, then the mining difficulty is decreased. This is what keeps the production of Bitcoin steady. And this is why, regardless of what price Bitcoin is at, you can't make it faster. You can't make more of it, because it has its own internal clock that will keep it to a particular pace. Right? And on the screen, we have a chart showing the difficulty adjustments over a certain period of time. And what it shows basically is that difficulty varies. And this was a period where they turned off a bunch of miners in China, and it's very visible in the chart how there was this huge drop, right? And the network just kept on ticking.
I remember hearing about that. I remember hearing about China just like killing all the miners.
Yeah.
Not killing them, like not killing them, but maybe.
Right. Shutting them off. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
So for a while, blocks were a little slow, and then the difficulty adjustment, kicked in, and then sort of business resumed as usual. So the Bitcoin network itself went through very significant disruptions this previous year, and it just sailed through them like a champ. And that's something important to understand also in the Bitcoin versus crypto thing. None of the other blockchains have really been tested under fire. Bitcoin has had these like significant challenges thrown up against it, and has passed with pretty much sailing, colors, with flying colors, and the other ones can't say the same. So why do miners mine? Like, why would anybody buy a computer and spend a ton of electricity trying to mine? Well, of course, to make some money, right? Miners incur a very real cost in terms of both buying the machines, upkeep, electricity, etc. And the reason is because they're hoping to get rewarded by mining valid blocks. And the rewards come in two different forms. There's a transaction fees, which is what we were talking about. If you're in a hurry and you want to make sure that your transaction gets in quick, then you pay a higher fee, right? If you're not in a rush, then you pay a low fee and don't care if it takes a few days. But then there's also the mining subsidy. For every new block found, the system itself pays the miner a fixed amount, right? So that reward um, a significant part of the reason why miners get into mining. And the reward is fixed for a certain period, but it changes every 4 years, right? So at the very beginning, it was 50 Bitcoin per block. So every block you found, you got 50 Bitcoin. And then after 4 years, that got sliced in half to 25. And by the way, when I say it got sliced in half, this was programmed in since the beginning. Like it's always been known that this is how it was going to be. This was not a surprise decision by anyone. This was baked into the protocol from the beginning, and it's going to keep happening every 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the most recent halving happened in 2020, and currently each new block gets 6.25 Bitcoin reward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the last halving is expected to happen in 2140. As of this
2100
moment,
as in the year 2140.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So it'll be a while before the last Satoshi is mined.
Mm-hmm.
And as of this moment, over 90% of all Bitcoin have already been mined.
Mm.
So when you look at the monetary supply of Bitcoin, what you see is that it started very inflationary, like a lot were being produced, but it
Sure.
very quickly tapered off, and it winds up evening out till it's at zero new coins, right? And if you overlay the real production of Bitcoin versus the theoretical rate at which it's produced, you'll see that mining speeds and blah 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 produces a little variation, but it's stuck pretty
Mm-hmm.
well to its schedule, right? So as a mechanism, it's pretty goddamn reliable.
Mm.
Now, if you want to look at the transaction fees per block, right? And again, this is all sort of open and transparent. You can look it up. You'll see that there's you can sort of see what miners are getting. You see those sudden dips that almost go to zero. It's because often what miners are programmed to do is once a new block is found, they immediately start working on the next block, right? But often they try to mine an empty block while they're forming this new block. And sometimes they get lucky and they mine a block that only has like one or two transactions in it.
Oops.
And they don't care because they get the reward anyway. So, they're happy.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Because the reward is the same. But
The reward is the same. Yeah. So the way mining works today is typically in pools, right? The odds of you finding a block by yourself are very, very small. So what you typically do is you join a pool. And what a pool basically is us saying, all right, guys, we have 1,000 machines here. We're all going to try to mine the exact same block. And if we get it, then we'll split the reward, according to how much computing power each of us contributed. So those are mining pools, and that's the way most modern mining works. Where is mining? Where are these mining pools? Well, as you can see,
that. Wow.
The majority of them used to be in China, but that took a dramatic nosedive last year.
Gosh.
And of course, everybody speculates that there's obviously still some mining going in China, but
sure.
They're not advertising, right? A lot of it went to Kazakhstan, but now they're also running into trouble there. So my bet is that those miners are also going to be finding a home elsewhere.
Wow.
A lot is coming to the US, but point being, it's fairly distributed. And
look at that. It's just so crazy. It's like talk about like shooting yourself in both feet. Like, I mean, I suppose with China's, they have to buy in completely to the whole fiat central bank IMF kind of paradigm. They don't really
CBDC.
They can't really chase two rabbits, because you chase two rabbits, you catch none. So if you're going to throw the entire weight of your country, behind a paradigm, like, all right, bye feet.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot of sort of speculation in the Bitcoin space of what was the real reason? Why are they really planning? Because nobody can believe they were like just that stupid to actually run out all the miners. It would be an incredible bungle. So, the amount of computing power dedicated to mining Bitcoin is measured in hashes per second. And on the screen, we have a chart of it, and you can basically see that it's been increasing very significantly. And you can see that huge dip when they turn off the Chinese miners.
That's
And
so
you can see
awesome.
how quickly it recovered, though.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so we're now back at all-time highs. So again, the network is strong. There's
Yes.
no computing network with more power there's no network with more computing power than Bitcoin, right? If you miners produce over 100 quintillion hashes per second, just to sort of to bring that back down to earth. If you try to run the mining network on MacBook Pros, you need about 1 trillion machines, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a lot of computing power. And price and hash power, a lot of Bitcoins should be, if I said they're correlated, and they're not, but they do tend to follow each other, right? Usually it's sort of this function of, all right, price goes up, more people get into mining, securing the network, and that gives people confidence, and then price keeps going up, and then they sort of follow this dance. And one thing I would like to make clear, because it's a frequent FUD point. Oh, Bitcoin uses all that energy.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin doesn't use all that energy or need all that energy. Bitcoin could run with half or a third of the amount of miners, and it would work just as well. It would be less secure, right? It's like if I were to make a vault to store gold coins, right? And I said, I'm going to make it, half an inch steel. Okay. Or I'm going to make it a foot, thick steel. Or, we're talking about the thickness of the wall here. How secure does it need to be? We don't know. But the vault still holds the same amount of coins, and it's still, the coins are fine. And more transactions don't take more energy. Bitcoin doesn't spend energy per transaction. Bitcoin spends energy per block, and a block has X amount of transactions. And this is a free market phenomenon of people willing to invest into energy and miners, blah blah, to secure the network. But Bitcoin would work just fine with less or more energy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So people think, oh my God, it's going to boil the oceans. You're uninformed. Just, read up on it.
Wait, what? Try reading a book.
Yeah. And finally, Bitcoin has spawned this sort of ecosystem where now we have different players, the custodians and the information services and the wallets and the developers and the financial guys who now want to pay you interest on your Bitcoin, which I don't necessarily recommend. All right. So
Seems like a
there's
bad
a
idea.
lot of things that have sort of sprouted around Bitcoin, which are not Bitcoin itself, but they sort of feed into the ecosystem and provide different services around it. So, some of the important takeaways is that Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer network. People like you and I run nodes at home, and we keep the network safe. We keep ourselves safe by doing that. And like everybody is encouraged to run a node in Bitcoin. Miners incur a real. By the way, the cost that miners incur in mining is part of the things that keep Bitcoin's price tied to reality,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is one of the things that proof of stake doesn't really do. Like there's a real cost of electricity that's incurred to mine a block,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's sort of anchored to physical reality, right? And then our nodes keep miners honest, and proof of work mining keeps the network secure. So it's a very interesting network in that it's kind of adverse. Well, it's very adversarial in that if everybody acts according to their own self-interest, then that's the perfect condition for the network to work just fine.
Makes
Right? We
perfect.
don't need to be friends.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you want to, what LaserHodl said is that, incentives rule the world, and there's no more stronger incentive than self-interest, but it's also very hard to align people's self-interest in a productive direction. I mean, that's all the whole game theory thing. So, right. So that's the cool part about, to switch on my light now. Um, that's the cool part about Bitcoin, is that it aligns everyone's self-interests in an ultimately productive direction.
Exactly. And that people who would try to sabotage it would not just incur a very steep cost in trying to do so,
Mm-hmm.
but even if
Exactly.
somebody's like successfully cracked the network, then what would happen? Well, probably the price would crash and they would be they would, the value of the network would be gone, right? They would have killed the golden goose.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
congratulations, you just spent $1 trillion, and gained nothing.
Well, I mean, let's talk about this then. So, some of the questions that generally come up is, let's go on the side that Bitcoin is a genuine threat to global finance, global power structures, et cetera, governments, central banks, et cetera. Well, why don't they just like stop it? Like, bro, how do they just like, they're just gonna like kill it
Uh,
someday, bro? Like, what are the responses to that? It's actually, I don't mean to mock the question. It is a serious question because
no,
it's a different way of
it's a
looking.
exactly it's a perfectly valid question. And by
Yeah.
the way, for those of you who are either new to Bitcoin or not yet in Bitcoin, these are important questions that you need to not just ask yourself, but to answer to your satisfaction. Like
Yeah.
I'll provide an answer which hopefully will point you in the right direction. But like every Bitcoiner, like I know, we've spent a lot of time going like, oh my God, I think we're going to get screwed this way. And then you research it and you go like, well, how does that work? And blah, blah, blah. And
Mm-hmm.
then you come to the point where you're like, oh, okay, I get it. So no, that's not the way I'm going to get screwed, but it's probably this other way. Right. And so you try to figure out how you're getting screwed. And at some point you're like, well, goddamn, maybe it really is what they say it is. No?
Yeah.
So in response to that question, this is why the real decentralization thing is so important. Like, and again, I'll use this opportunity to take a cheap shot at Ethereum because why wouldn't I?
Please.
Like 70% of all Ethereum nodes, last time I checked, which was last week, run on Amazon Web Services,
Oh, no
right?
way.
So, shut that off, and you've eliminated 70% of all Ethereum nodes,
What?
in like five
What?
seconds. Uh, with Bitcoin, where's the off switch?
How
You
terrible is
know,
that? Sorry, keep
you
going.
you have to go to 10,000, 14,000, 5,000. I don't know how many people's homes, and try to turn off their nodes. And good luck finding all of them.
Yeah.
It's not easy to, are you going to turn off the entire internet? Well, if you do, then you probably have bigger problems to worry about than Bitcoin. And by the way, like let's just for giggles, because we were discussing this the other day. If they turn off the internet, let's say for 2 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once they turn it back on, the nodes would just go back online and start gossiping with each other. Hey, bro, did you get any transactions or offline? No, bro. Did you? Yeah, here's one. All right, great. And the network would just sort of pick up where it left off. And sure, there'd be some a period of confusion for a few hours, but it'd be back up and running at no time.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the Bitcoin network is being broadcast via satellite now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's these like couple of $100 kits that you can use to sync up with a node via satellite, even if the internet goes back down. So let's just put it this way: it's more resilient than your bank for sure, and it's just really not easy to kill because it
Mm-hmm.
has no head to cut off, right? If they want to, um, if they want to arrest, if they want to stop Ethereum, they'd arrest Vitalik Buterin and Joe Lubin and a handful of other core developers, and that'd kind of be that. It's easy to spot the central people in most crypto projects.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck finding Satoshi, and even if you found him, he's been out of the loop for over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a meaningless gesture right now. The fact that nobody owns or controls the network is precisely what makes it hard and increasingly impossible to kill.
So so from a technical standpoint, do Bitcoin nodes run on particular ports, say through your internet connection? Because different internet connections, different natures of the signal, as I understand it, run through different ports. What if they just shut down that port? You move it to another one, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a good question, which, to be honest, goes beyond my technical abilities to tell you what exactly the workaround is. I'm fairly sure that if it were just a matter of like switching ports, it'd be a headache, but not, that wouldn't kill the network.
And then the Bitcoin network survives because of nodes and miners. How many miners? Yeah, I don't remember do we actually know how many miners there
Oh
are?
God, no,
No,
we
okay.
don't.
Okay. And
And
yeah, go ahead.
so we don't. And this is also really important. Just like you don't need permission to run a node, you also don't need permission to mine. Like you can go on a website right now and you can buy a little miner, and it's still not exactly plug and play. You need 220 power. It consumes quite a bit. It's noisy. It runs hot, but you can run a miner at home or wherever you want, and nobody needs to know about it. And that's that's also part of the power is that and of course, if you're running a big mining operation, it's like running a big weed grow, right? The heat
Right.
signature is gonna be visible, so it's not necessarily perfect, but it's moving towards more decentralization and towards more resiliency.
Yeah, and if for whatever, I think I read a tweet today that said they're going to make mining illegal, and if that's the case, and all the miners around the world essentially like all shut down at the same moment, then the difficulty level would just get reduced to the point where just someone mining potentially with a home based kind of rig can do it instead of needing
Exactly.
these giant kind of like shipping containers full of hundreds of CPUs.
Exactly. Like some of my clients used to mine Bitcoin on their laptop back in college.
That's cool. Those are the days.
Yeah.
Okay. So then there's that. So you can't take out all the nodes. You can't take out all the miners, right? Let's see. How about if what if people can't get their fiat currency into Bitcoin? Because like people don't earn Bitcoin, like they get paid from work or whatever, and so they have to they have to have some on ramp so their fiat currency converted into Bitcoin from an exchange or something like that. So what about if you shut down the
Right.
exchanges?
Right. And that is for sure, that is the best choke point they do have, right?
Mm-hmm.
The place where Bitcoin and fiat touch is the exchanges, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the most likely stranglehold. And there's a couple of, and by the way, just the earlier, just for a second, back to the earlier question, the more likely thing is if they like ban Bitcoin or Bitcoin mining, it's like, well, they do it someplace, but some other place will say, oh, we'll take your money, we'll take your, you're welcome here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the nice things about like this problem with exchanges, it's a real concern,
Mm-hmm.
and the solutions are perhaps threefold. One is, of course, as a Bitcoin circular economy starts developing, then maybe, hey, well, you're going to do something for me. I'll pay you in sats, and you don't need to cash the fiat. You can take sats. So eventually, you'll probably be able to buy and sell and transact more easily in Bitcoin than that what you can now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of one avenue. The other avenue is what are called decentralized exchanges, which are kind of like a Napster kind of thing where there's not really an exchange like a company somewhere running a server, but when you log into the exchange, sort of you become part of the exchange,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you're dealing with people on a direct basis, and they just put in place certain mechanisms where, let's say, if Will wants to send to sell me some Bitcoin, then you post your Bitcoin on a multi-sig account, which means you still have control of it, but they can see that you've got it really. And then you can offer it to the public. And if I think your price is reasonable, then I say I'm interested. And then you tell me to which bank account I will send you money. And I do a direct transaction to your bank, and nowhere, there's no Bitcoin mentioned anywhere. I just send you money to your account. And then once you receive it, you say, all right, fine. And then you release the Bitcoin to me. And if you don't, then there's some arbitration process, blah, blah. So that's an evolving ecosystem, but it's one thing that's being worked on. And by the way, this is one of Jack Dorsey's projects as well, is trying to figure out how to do a protocol for these, to make these decentralized exchanges sort of more standardized and intercompatible, blah, blah. But it's one of the areas that people are working on, right? Another is sort of OTC transactions, like you know me and I know you, and then you're like, you know what, I need some cash, but I've got some Bitcoin. I'm like, all right, send me your Bitcoin and I'll pay whoever you want because I'm interested. So it would definitely be a pain in the butt if they banned exchanges. If you were like deep into Bitcoin, you could always just take your Bitcoin and move elsewhere where they didn't ban exchanges, right? But I understand that this is not necessarily the most appetizing thing for most people. But point being, could they do that, or have they done that in other places? Yes. And what's happened? The price of Bitcoin has gone through the roof, and a very healthy black market has developed, and Bitcoin transactions have shut up. We've seen this in Africa and in India and in several places. So not an easy technology to ban. And I fully expect them to regulate exchanges more tightly. I don't expect them to ban it, especially not in the US. It's too late for that.
And I think that's the thing about Bitcoin that made it really compelling to me, is like, it's a very resilient network. And if you're looking for something that's, it's got to be absolutely bulletproof, or I won't even think about it. It's like, well, you don't really have a choice, because there's no such thing. Like, because you can poke holes in gold, you can poke holes in, but what about bullets, bro? It's like, dude, if it gets to the point that we're using bullets as currency, we have more worries.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, but the thing about Bitcoin is that, like, and this is true, just to piggyback off of LaserHodl's perspective on masculinity, which I agree with. Like, the point of masculinity is not to be impermeable. The point is to be resilient, because we're all going to go through things that, that knock us down, that spin us around, potentially from all different kinds of sources. But can we actually get up from it? And the cool thing about Bitcoin is that it can actually get up from those. Like, these questions are legitimate and should be asked. But is there a response? Oh yeah, for sure there's a response. And that's the really important thing.
And one thing I would add about to what you just said is that one of the things that for me was super attractive and has kept me in Bitcoin is that the amount of brain power that's focused on making this work is just amazing. Like, brilliant people are like very actively working on figuring out what the problems are, how to fix them, blah, blah, blah. So that makes me very hopeful.
Yeah. And so let's talk about so those are all let's talk about the privacy question, and then we'll transition into the whole, maybe we'll use that as a bridge into the whole question about like, oh, Bitcoin is some sort of like central bank kind of like, globalist scam to get all of our information. I got that question on Instagram today, that it's like,
Right.
this is the honeypot that people are being, I mean, I can refute that all kinds of ways, but what's a valid question. So let's
Yeah.
talk about the
Yeah.
privacy issue that, you go on an exchange and you go to buy some Bitcoin, and you have to use a government issued, ID. And so
Yes.
there's a way at which transactions, and with the transparency, with the global public ledger, there's a way that transactions can be tracked throughout the network. And if you have the right information, you can know who has what. And so let's discuss that issue as well.
Right. So when you buy your coins through an exchange, your purchase is typically fully KYC'd, which means your customer, which means your ID is very clearly linked to that transaction, right?
What is KYC? Sorry.
Know your customer.
Okay.
So we talk about transaction being KYC. It means your name is attached to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you move your coins, oh, by the way, guys, when you buy your coins in an exchange, you should move them out of the exchange and onto your own wallet, because when they're in the exchange, you don't really have them. You have an IOU from the exchange saying, I have your coins, right? So once you move them to a wallet where you control your keys, then you are sort of in possession of your Bitcoin. And that's something that, again, we Bitcoiners encourage everybody to do that. But yeah, there's companies like Chainalysis who make a very strong effort to try to link each Bitcoin transaction to an identity and to do all sorts of analysis of, all right, what IP address was this transaction broadcast from, and who does that belong to, and da 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 da. And they try to link all of that to your identity. So Bitcoin is not anonymous. Bitcoin is pseudonymous, right? So, which means your name is not attached to any transaction, but not in the system. But people who can look at the metadata of the network traffic and other things could definitely, piece together which transactions belong to you, at least to a certain degree. It's a probabilistic thing, but they have good algorithms to try to do that. So the first thing is just understand that your Bitcoin is not anonymous, right? And don't use it as if it were. If
I shouldn't go buy drugs on the black market with my Bitcoin.
Exactly. That's what you use dollars for, sir.
Now you tell me. Thanks. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Toby.
So if you want KYC free Bitcoin that is not attached to your name, you can either earn it by charging people in Bitcoin. You can do these sorts of OTC deals where you pay me and I give you Bitcoin, or you can mine. Because mining is, there's no KYC there. It's just you have a little machine and it spits out sats, and you point that to a wallet, and those are KYC free, which is one good reason too. Now, a lot of us Bitcoiners are very privacy focused, right? And there's
hence why there's no picture of you on the screen.
Right. By the way, my clients do get to see my face though, because I do understand that it helps. Right?
I mean, he looks a lot like George Clooney, so he just can't be showing that to everybody. Like, you got to earn that.
Oh well, now you spoil it.
A Latin George Clooney.
Yeah, thank you.
Cross.
There's a strong encouragement to try to not buy your coins from KYC sources and use this sorts of decentralized exchanges. And while I agree with sentiment, they're also more complicated to use, right? So there's a learning curve, and I strongly encourage people to climb that learning curve and get onto those decentralized exchanges and buy it. But don't let that stop you from getting your first sats. I mean, it's fine. It's not the end of the world if you buy them at an exchange.
Mm-hmm. And so now let's address the sets of questions. So we talked about, how Bitcoiners is a resilient network that will be very difficult to take down. And then we talked about the privacy concerns which come up. But let's actually address directly the question of like, this is some sort of globalist scam to get all of our money into one centralized ledger that they can watch and track, and it's a surveillance trap. Let's address that question.
Right. So let's just assume that that's the case for a moment, right? Um, like personally, I would rather have my money be like perfectly visible but unstoppable. Like maybe they can see what I'm doing with my money, but they can't tell me what to do. They can't take it from me. They cannot confiscate it. They can't freeze it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
We can't
So
hyperinflate
uh,
it.
they can't inflate it. So and and the direction that Bitcoin is moving in, and we see this in upgrades like the recent thing we moved to Taproot. Uh, the Bitcoin software is not frozen in time. It keeps evolving. It does so slowly because there's a very strong first do no harm type of mandate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we like to make the analogy of it's like you're programming software for a nuclear reactor. You don't. This is not a move fast and break things environment, right? You want to make sure
Right.
you don't break anything. So it's not like super fast turnaround on everything, but we're moving towards more private transactions. We're moving towards uh, technology upgrades that sort of obfuscate, make it harder to track. And we're not all the way there yet by any
Sure.
stretch, but it is moving in that direction. And and by the way, if we once those technologies start taking hold, and when once people start transacting more in Bitcoin, that's the other thing. It starts getting mixed up. Like one of the common ways today of trying to gain privacy is called coin joining or coin mixing,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, let's say you put 500,000 sats and I put 500,000 sats, and 10 other people put in 500,000 sats, and they all get sort of mixed together into like 80 transactions, sort of on and off, and then we get little stacks of, I don't know, 30,000 stacks each, that have
Mm-hmm.
been sort of thoroughly mixed, that even if they knew who the coins were attached to going in, they're no longer sure which ones went to whom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this technology is also difficult to parse. Like there's two main schools of how to do this, and they're constantly fighting. And I see like Bitcoiners I respect on both sides of the aisle, and so right now I don't know it enough to recommend to somebody who's beginning.
Right.
But it's fairly clear that there's work being done to minimize the ways in which they can track you, and I am confident that that will continue to improve. And again, even if it didn't, for the moment, I'd rather sacrifice some privacy for the other properties which make Bitcoin extremely valuable. And I'm not by any means discounting privacy. I do think it's crucial. I just think having good money sort of comes first, and I would not sacrifice the good money part just to get privacy. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're that concerned, use your Bitcoin to buy one of the privacy coins, to buy your drugs in the black market if you want, but but that doesn't mean that those
Don't judge
privacy coins are
me.
good money.
Don't judge me.
I did.
Okay. No, I think that's totally valid. And again, it highlights just how much brain power is in this network. Like that's not obvious from the outside, is that there's the technology, right? There's the network, but there's also the culture around it. and the culture is very, to say it's freedom centric gives it a particular color, but I'll just go with that. I mean, these are people that are very, very dedicated with the full weight of their intellect, to upending or exiting from the existing fiat system. I mean, just listen to LaserHodl. Like, you just listen to that podcast, and this is a man who, I could get what he was saying. Like, I could see the picture. I couldn't have assembled that picture myself. And that's a man, that is a highly intelligent man, and he's one of many that are working on all of these problems. So as you say, it's Bitcoin is not static, it's not frozen in time, the software is not frozen in time. There's not one answer for all eternity. These are very smart people that are taking a very smart, very stable approach to reforming, reworking the network to address some concerns. And I think that that's the part that's kind of invisible to the average person, is until you start getting into Bitcoin Twitter or listening to podcasts or reading books, or watching YouTube videos, you don't have a good sense of just how much intelligence, heart, passion, drive, dedication, and devotion is behind this network. And that, more than anything, gives the feeling of being on a winning team, on a powerful team of men and women who are absolutely dedicated to making this work. And when you have that kind of intensity, and you have that kind of esprit de corps, anything is possible. And yeah, in my experience, like, I participate in the Bitcoin cheerleading 1,000%, especially now more than later. But that's part of the fun of it. That's part of the fun of, a bunch of men and women on deck of a ship, going through a storm, like one of those Jack Sparrow Pirates of the Caribbean type ships. You're singing as, things are going crazy. That's the fun.
Look at last week, right? We dropped 50%, and you have all the Bitcoiners, singing sea shanties on Twitter. We're like, riding the dip. And just like you listen to LaserHodl, right? But then you listen to Greg Foss connect the dots on bonds, and you listen to Michael Saylor connect the dots on technology and engineering and the digitalization of things. And you listen to Preston Pish or Lynn Alden on the macroeconomic. And so there are so many brilliant people that can look at, from their expertise, connected back to Bitcoin. And, my mind is blown on a regular basis. And part of the challenge is that there's this embarrassment of riches in terms of high quality content to consume.
I know.
And it's a problem because, if somebody, Bitcoin, here's 500 hours of great podcast. Oh my God,
It's 100 hours of LaserHodl. Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. I got 5% of that.
Exactly. So I see that as sort of part of my job, is helping synthesize some of that and to give people a taste of some of that, so that they can say, all right, well, this bit was really interesting, and I'd like to look at it more from this part, or this part I don't understand at all. I need to dig into that part, a little deeper. But to give them sort of an overall perspective on the landscape.
Well, talk a little bit more about what it is that you do as the Bitcoin coach for your clients. Talk more about the portfolio of services, because I think it's really important for people to know that, yes, there is an enormous, enormous content, and brain power ecosystem. I mean, what's Saifedean talked to Jordan Peterson, and
Saifedean, man.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and Jordan Peterson started to get it a little bit too. Like, that's a pro-institution dude. But he just never really looked into Bitcoin. But like, he started to get it by the end of the conversation. You could kind of feel his mind beginning to change. And so the Bitcoin conversation reaches up to entirely that level. And it's like, it's really easy for someone to kind of get lost. There's jargon, there's the same kind of things that you'd experience in any community of people who are passionate about a subject, where it's like shared lingo, shared jokes, in jokes, all, symbols like, what do the laser eyes mean? Like, what, like, yeah. So it's kind of intimidating, but that's why we need someone like you, like a Bitcoin coach, to help people who they're occupied with the general things of life, and maybe they're not, maybe they're not technologists, maybe they're not interested in exploring on their own, but you help build those, I guess we might say, conceptual on-ramps for people in some really interesting ways. So I wonder if you can talk about that for people.
You mean there's people that don't spend all their day on Bitcoin Twitter? Oh my God.
There's a couple of them, one or two. I mean, what are you doing?
Yeah. So, um, what I basically did was I assembled material into 5 conversations, which is what is Bitcoin? Why does it matter? How does it work? What are the risks? And how do I buy and store safely? Right? Because I think like and neither of these is like super comprehensive. It's kind of like what we did today. We sort of ran through, how Bitcoin works, uh, and there's a ton more that you can dig into. But this at least sort of lays the groundwork for us saying, okay, I kind of get it now. I need to look into nodes more, into mining more, or whatever it is. So what I've tried to do with these conversations is precisely make accessible, right, the basic knowledge that you need to start grasping the entirety of why this matters, and why. One of the things I always tell my clients is, I can't trust Bitcoin for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You need to build that trust on your own, because how much do I put into Bitcoin? Well, it's always like a step function, right? You start with a little, and then you sort of live through it, and there's up and downs, and then you if you study, then you get a little extra. Oh, okay, I got this now. So you put in a little more, and then you keep studying, and as your trust in the asset increases, not because somebody else told you, but because you understand it, then usually your allocation to it increases as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when we had that conversation in January 2020. I knew, summer, July 2020. I knew nothing about Bitcoin at all, besides, that it was, I think I probably would have said, as a cryptocurrency, and that was about it. And I remember, and that was in one of your early versions of your conversations. Were coming up on almost 2 years ago, a year and a half. And within 2 conversations, I mean, took place over 2 weeks, I was like, yes, I get it. And so it's really powerful once you actually have the opportunity to break it down for people in that direction, where it's like, yes, okay, I get the vision. I get why this is important. But there aren't many people that are available really to do that. And you do that, you do that for families as well, right? It's not just individuals, because yes, there are individuals, but like, as LaserHodl discussed, from the perspective of a man that's trying to preserve his wealth and preserve his work and his effort for the generations, like, there's questions about family investment as well that are really, really relevant.
Absolutely.
I've got my 401k, I've got all these my investment portfolio, stock picks, et cetera. It's like, well, maybe you should think about moving that into Bitcoin. So you have that conversation as well, right?
Yeah, I've worked with 3 or 4 families, which have been, by the way, my favorite conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Because what usually happens, like one of my clients who was joking today that, oh, my wife's going to ask why my bank account is empty tomorrow, right? One of the things that happens with Bitcoin is that if only one family member is into it, then the rest think that this person has lost their mind and joined a cult, and they worry. So one of the valuable things I found about getting everybody in the conversation, mom, dad, the kids, is that everybody at least gets what it's about,
Mm-hmm.
and why. And it's been interesting to see, sometimes, like, everybody's engaged during the conversations, and some people like clearly got it, and sort of are the Bitcoiners in the family.
Mm-hmm.
But even those who aren't, at least, are no longer scared or put off or alienated, because at least they understand what's going on to enough of an extent not to be concerned about the one person who's a hardcore Bitcoiner.
Mm-hmm.
So at least 2 of the families were like, dad wanted all the family to understand, and one was more like the teenager was bugging dad about Bitcoin, to the point where he was like, okay, fine, I'll stay in for the first conversation. I'm not sitting for 5 of these. And he's one of the clients who he did stay for the 5, and he's one of the ones who still texts me, hey, I just did this, and he's the one who just upped his allocation by 40% during this dip. So
So good. It's so good. Do you find that there's a common set of questions that people ask, like what's the big question, and is there one particular piece of information that you've observed, or a couple that really sets off the light, or is it different per person or different per group?
I'd say it is different per person. One thing that, like, when people don't know that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
like the first time they hear that, and then they hear that 90% of them have already been mined, that's usually a okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that makes them sit up and take notice. Um, the rest, I think it depends. Like, if you're somebody who's really happy with your bank, right, and loves institutions, yeah, then you might have a harder time sort of understanding the value of Bitcoin. I do find that most the people who get into it the most either have had bad experiences with their banks, or have like tried to do interesting things with their money, like trying to send a payment abroad and having that be challenging, or
Mm-hmm.
having try wire transfers take forever, or certain countries are not supported, or having to move large amounts, or whatever that different cases. But if I think having some amount of dissatisfaction with the current financial institutions often helps pique that interest and saying, all right, I would be interested in something better, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you're thrilled with your bank, then it might take you longer to find out why we believe this is useful.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, some of my clients are in third world countries where they have lived through serious currency debasement.
Mm,
And it's interesting. Like, there are certain things that I don't need to explain to them so much as I
right.
do to, like, some of my US clients who are used to living in, the world's reserve currency.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so just a couple more questions, because I want to keep this like digestible, because obviously I could talk for 5 hours about it. But okay, so help unpack this recent dip. Like, what's going on? Because Bitcoin was up to 70,000, touched that sort of ceiling early this year, and now it's below 50% of that, and it's been I love it, like more for me. But what's that? Is there any sense of like what's been going on over the past, say, few days, as things have been going a bit crazy?
I think the consensus seems to be that it's about the Fed is going to have an announcement tomorrow, right?
Mm,
And they have been making noises about slowing down the money printer in
mm,
different possible ways, right? They could raise rates, they could dial back quantitative easing, they could basically slow down the speed at which they're pumping up the economy.
mm-hmm.
They've said they're going to do this, and it's not. I mean, they it's not easy. It's not hard to see why, right?
Right.
Inflation is running pretty hot, and the problem is, um, there's questions about their actual ability to do so without causing a meltdown,
Mm,
right? This is not something where they can just finally turn a dial, and
right.
they're doing surgery with an axe kind of thing. So when they say that they're no longer, they're slowing down the money printer, all risk assets sort of take a dive, right?
Okay.
And so, which is why you saw both, not just Bitcoin, but both Bitcoin and the stock market both plunging.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Today was interesting. Today, Bitcoin started rising while the stock market kept going down. Could be a temporary thing. If there's a decoupling from those two, that would be very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But the the overall consensus does seem to be that, regardless of whether the Fed really cuts rates or not, whatever they do is probably going to be temporary, because any strong measures would really, like, be like nuking the economy, and
Yeah.
like they want to win the next election, so they want to, and then they want to avoid people with pitchforks on the street.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll do their best to control inflation, which, uh, but since there's serious questions about their ability to actually do it, so it's a temporary thing, and I think and this is important to understand about Bitcoin. Whatever money you put into it, just assume you're not going to see it for 2, 4, or like I know LaserHodl said 2 years. I always say 4 years,
Right.
right? Because the in between, it'll go up and down like crazy. It'll try to shake you off. The first cycle is the most difficult,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that everything is pointing towards a phenomenal, you know, rise in Bitcoin over the next couple of years.
Right.
But you know, the Fed is the biggest whale in the room, and whenever they look at anything sideways, you know, the markets crumble and shake. So I think it's mostly this particular dip was mostly caused by the Fed, and tomorrow's meeting will be either the cause for a further dip or maybe a rebound, depending on what they say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how, wow, we want to win the next election and inflation's going through the roof. So let's go ahead and call the Fed. Like, isn't that a bit odd? Isn't that a bit strange that that the Democrat president, would make a call over to adjust financial policy so that he could get some more support in the midterm elections. Like, that's very bizarre when you kind of think about it. Like, we take it for granted, but I think it's very bizarre that the printing of money is tied to political interests, and those particular political interests are themselves tied to COVID, social justice, and everything represented by the progressive slash liberal slash whatever they're called now left. Like, I think that's very curious. And we take it for granted, but like, there's no reason why it should necessarily be that way. Why Federal Reserve policy should serve a sitting president as opposed to say the public. I mean, obviously, to suggest that the Federal Reserve policy would serve the public is, it's crazy talk. Like, what are you
Well,
smoking, Will? Like, you get some more of that
so
Monero Ethereum crap, but yeah, go ahead.
some of us would believe that presidents serve the Federal Reserve interests.
Amen. Well said. Well said. Touche, sir. Touche. Okay, so then one last question is, what's your favorite part of Bitcoin? Like, what's the part that just makes you the most excited? Oh, wait, actually, no. I want to talk about Satoshi Nakamoto first. Can we do that? Can we do that for like two?
Sure,
Okay, let's
sure.
let's talk about, because this did come up as like related to the question about
Yeah.
privacy. Like, why doesn't anyone know who Satoshi Nakamoto is? Do you know who he really is? Like, I don't know. It's Klaus Schwab in his underwear. Like, probably not. But who
Uh,
is Satoshi Nakamoto, and why is it important that we don't actually know who he is? I think I just answered the question, but whatever.
right. Oh, I think it's crucially important because it's not. First of all, God bless Satoshi, and thank you very much. You know, it's the what he achieved is, to me, it's like unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Like the level of accomplishment of what he did. Like I'm really like awed
Yeah.
by what he did. And first of all, if we ever found out who he was, he would have a huge target on his back, right?
Right.
Like if I knew who he was, which I don't, I would never, say it, or I wouldn't even say like a theory, blah blah, because I think it'd be in horrible taste
Mm-hmm.
and sort of disrespectful to the man who gave us this gift, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it pisses me off when people start coming up with their theories of, oh, and I have this evidence. Like, dude, just let
Leave
it
it alone.
rest. I mean, I have some people that I like to uh, point at as saying, all right, this is a person who's not Satoshi, but should be, right?
Right.
Like Neil Stevenson, the cipher, the science
Cypherpunk
fiction
author.
author.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Um, like he would be a wonderful Satoshi in terms of there's so many of his books that deal with money conceptually, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that have helped me understand a lot of the different, like they've been instrumental for me to understand some of the evolution of money and its history and blah blah. So wonderful candidate. Michael Saylor, another one, right? Like I don't think he is, but um,
Yeah.
I've thought of creating a Satoshi Nakamoto award, and they just you give it to somebody one year and then they have to give it to somebody else the next year. No committees, no anything. Just whoever got it gets to.
Mm,
It's an honorary prize.
that's cool.
So I think it's important that we don't know who the person is because I generally think that person's life would be at risk, and not just as in they'd be killed, but probably horribly tortured before they were killed,
Yeah.
right? Like the wallets that are associated with Satoshi, because those coins were mined when there were very few miners, hold about 1 million Bitcoin, right?
Mm,
So that's a just financially, right? That's a huge amount of money that just that incentive alone would be enough to cause him harm.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Wow.
but also the fact that he did this from anonymity and disappeared after uh, is one of the key differences between Bitcoin and all of crypto,
Right.
right? Most cryptos are what we call a security, which is I have this project and I'm going to sell you a bit of that project and you're going to make money because we're going to do X, Y, and Z and we're all going to profit. That's called a security,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that it's illegal to sell securities without a bunch of running through a lot of red tape, which cryptos didn't.
Right.
And that's going to be an interesting fight to see. I know that the SEC is probably going to declare a bunch of crypto securities, and we'll see how much of a bite they actually have or not. Blah blah. That'll be something that we'll probably see happening in the next few years. And I'm not a fan of the government going after anyone, but it's something that people who are new to this should be aware that. I don't know how much the SEC can or can't do, but it is likely that many crypto projects will be found to be illegal securities.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin was not, because there was no team promising
Mm,
returns, and blah, blah, blah. This guy just did this openly. Anybody could run the software from day one. Anybody could mine from day one. Everybody earned the coins that they mined. There was no what they call a pre-mine, which a lot of projects, like for example, Ethereum did a 70% pre-mine.
mm.
So 70% of the coins of Ethereum were assigned day one,
Great.
right? Yeah.
Totally. Ethereum is not sketch at all, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why the World Economic Forum loves them.
Oh my gosh. So bad.
So the way Bitcoin was born, right? Some Bitcoiners jokingly call it the Immaculate Conception,
Hmm.
but it is an unusual and an unrepeatable set of circumstances.
Yeah.
Where it was made by somebody that nobody knows who that person is, and it was open to the public. I mean, yeah, you had to be in the know at the beginning, just because, I actually have a guy that I've chatted with who was in that mailing list when Satoshi announced. I'll see if we can get a conversation going with him. He's a really great guy.
Okay. That's really cool. Like, wow, watching history happen.
Yeah. And he didn't get into Bitcoin until like a couple of years ago. He missed it.
Oops. Missed it completely. Like,
no, I mean,
there it goes.
Not completely, but I mean, like people who get in today haven't missed it, right? But
if you were
being
there,
on
like
the ground floor,
the ground, you're in the basement.
Yeah, the little basement. I mean,
yeah.
Goddamn.
Yeah.
So again, so I think that's why it's important that we don't spend too much energy or effort trying to find out who Satoshi is. I think it's, but The one thing that we do know is that it's not Craig Wright, who I don't know if you've heard him mentioned before, not Fake
No,
Toshi.
faked. Yeah, I
Oh
have
my
actually. That
God.
does sound familiar.
It's this clown who claims that he's Satoshi, and
He's
he's
still
just like
alive, so it's
not.
probably
And
not
he's
him.
he's also like gone into lawsuits with people and said he was going to prove it, and it'd be easy to prove, by the way, at least
Yeah, move the
like if you
coins.
move the coins, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but he hasn't done any of that anyway. Huge clown. um oh God.
Yeah, I think it's really important that Satoshi be anonymous. I don't think he's in the public eye either. I know that people try to figure out who he might be. I don't know whoever this guy is. Like, I have this imagination. I have no evidence of this that he just like disappeared, just totally disappeared. And I remember that when we were going through the coaching initially, I said this to LaserHodl, I expected to read the
Yeah,
white paper and get some
I
sort of like
remember.
mystical energy around it. Like, oh, just to read, there's something not right. Like not right, but like
No,
something
but maybe
otherworldly.
like
But
an artificial intelligence. I remember you said you expected
yeah.
that maybe it'd have that sort of vibe or something.
And it absolutely did not. It was like this was written by a man. It has a very clear, style. It's very grounded. It doesn't, it was super grounded. And I think whoever that dude is, I presume it's a dude, I guess, but it probably is, but just disappeared. And I think it's really important that he did that because everyone would evaluate Bitcoin based on the individual. It's like, oh,
Right.
and there's no way at this point that any human being can live up to that. Like, what's he supposed to be, like 7'5" and like
Right.
ripped and or whatever? You know what I mean? Like some sort of, I mean, whatever. He can't possibly satisfy everybody, and forever his actions, the security, the safety, the stability of the network will be tied to his actions and choices. And for what Bitcoin is and what it represents, I guess I speculate he must have known. And that's the thing that's really crazy is
Yeah.
that like he couldn't have known because you never know whether your work is ever going to catch on. You can do something amazing and it may not catch on for reasons that have nothing to do with you. But I can't do a man that smart who synthesized that many different aspects and brought them all together and came up with a solution would have to know that like, yeah, I just have to disappear. I just have to disappear
Yeah.
because if this becomes successful, it will need to exist on its own without me. And there's something kind of miraculous about that in a way. That level of
Oh,
insight that I would want to stand up, not me, but like you could stand up and like, look,
right.
I made this thing. Look how amazing I are. It's like, nope, you gotta even walk away from that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's a beautiful story. Like the actual and the fact that it's not a story. It's like the reality of what happened. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So now to the question of what is your favorite part about Bitcoin?
Ah, it's Bitcoiners.
Mm,
Like there's so many people I enjoy in the space, like different takes. Some are super like goofy and blah blah. Some are like super hard ass numerical blah blah. Some are hardcore libertarians, foul mood blah. I mean, there's like really very different flavors of Bitcoiners, and
mhm,
just like getting to uh, peek into their minds, through their discourse on Twitter or podcasts or whatever, for me has been a super rewarding journey. I mean, it's been really a joy to be exposed to that many intelligent people sort of trying to do their best to really grok this as
mhm,
fully as possible, and seeing how the grasp is never really quite wide enough, but still, like the process and the effort itself is wonderful.
mhm. That's pretty remarkable that something that would seem so simple requires not just so much processing power in terms of the miners to make the network go, but so much brain power in order to begin to understand it. It's like a festival of wonders to begin to explore the network. And that's a really good answer. I was going to ask you to put some of these names together for notes, the podcast notes on YouTube and on like Spotify. But I think what I'd rather do is have people go and sign up for your mailing list, and you can send them a list of those recommendations. I'm on your mailing
Oh,
list, so I'll
wonderful
get.
idea. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
because that's the thing is, I want people to find the doorway in to Bitcoin, and then, it's a house of many rooms. It's like the Renaissance of Men. It's way, I discover new rooms of the Renaissance of Men every day. In fact, I'm in the middle of discovering one right now, and it's too much for any one
Yeah.
man to make the whole thing go. There's so many different dimensions of it, and Bitcoin works the same way. And, the doorway in for people to begin finding the content creators that really appeal to them, because different men and women will be drawn to different things.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, one of the things I do is a weekly newsletter, which my intention is to help people keep up with Bitcoin in, say, 15 minutes per week or something, which I think is a reasonable ask, right? Because I understand how people will balk at when I say, oh, this 2-hour podcast is great.
Right.
And then there's this other 2-hour, it gets to be a lot. I get that. But I think 15 minutes a week is reasonable. And usually the way I try to structure is just like what happened, last week. And it's mostly based off of Twitter. So I put in some of what I think are the important tweets of the week into context. And then I offer some charts of what seems to be happening with price. And I usually do like a deep dive of, if you want to dig into a particular, here's one. If you want to dig in deeper, here's one good conversation this week that you should look at, right? And if it's easy enough, if you find any of the articles in it interesting, to go and dig and spend more time, but it's something that's easy to sort of look through and just keep up with what's going on in the space, which I think is important because Bitcoin keeps moving, and we're still at the rate where things are happening. Like American Express is now thinking of paying out their points in Bitcoin, right? All right, so that's a good deal.
That's positive.
So those are the little things that it's nice to sort of keep up on or keep up with.
Well, I think that's great. I think let's leave it there and let people continue the conversation with you. And where can people go to find out more about you and what you do?
Thank you. So on Twitter, I am at Bitcoin Coach. And on the web, you can find me at thebitcoin.coach. And those are the two best places to find me.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for all the work that you put in, preparing for this conversation, listening to LaserHodl podcast ahead of time, taking some notes, and being ready to answer some of the natural questions that would have come up from our what is the Bitcoin community calls it, a RIP, the 5 hour.
Right.
I've noticed that it's like, well, that's a RIP. So the 5 hour RIP, and I definitely encourage everyone listening that if you're at zero with Bitcoin or a novice at Bitcoin and you're looking for more information and to dive in more deeply, I recommend Carlos and his work very highly, because it transformed me. And now 18 months later, here I am. So thanks so much, Carlos.
Thank you very much, Will. I really enjoyed this.